Hello and welcome back to Bamboo Batu, where we love to talk about bamboo. And today we're talking about bamboo and carbon credits. This is an especially fascinating subject, hot topic that people are contacting me about on a very regular basis. It's a little bit confusing, and we're going to try to clear it up here in the next few minutes to the best of my ability. So first, let's talk about the carbon credit system. What's that all about? Carbon credit is created when an action is taken to eliminate or avoid the emission of 1 metric ton of carbon or carbon equivalent from the atmosphere. So if you have a project such as a forest that is converting carbon dioxide into oxygen, then you are removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. If you have some other high-tech project, there are many ways you could be extracting CO2 from the atmosphere using forestry, using technology, machinery, bodies of water. There's a lot of different ways. You can Google that because that's a whole other subject. But we're basically talking about bamboo here, and there's a few ways bamboo can sequester CO2. But the idea is companies are trying to reduce their carbon footprint, whether voluntarily or because they're required by the government or some international treaty, such as the Paris Agreement, the Kyoto Protocol. And some companies have a hard time doing that, reducing their emissions. So, for example, an airline flying airplanes around the world, they're pumping out tons and tons of CO2 and greenhouse gases. And they've been required to reduce those emissions. And if they cannot reduce those emissions themselves, then what they need to do is buy credits from another project that is reducing emissions. And so in some cases, it might be cheaper for them to develop technology to reduce their emissions. In other cases, it might be cheaper for them to go out and purchase credits from another project, from a company that specializes in that carbon removal technology, because the airline might not necessarily specialize in that technology. But with the carbon credit system, that's going to create greater and greater incentives for those companies to develop technology that will be more efficient and produce fewer greenhouse gases and release less CO2 into the atmosphere. So that's the idea. It's a pretty interesting use of market forces to enforce reduction of greenhouse gases. And right now it's a little bit unclear exactly how this market is going to work out. And so there's a lot of speculation and a little bit of confusion and some uncertainty around the whole thing. But basically, yeah, 1 ton of carbon removed is equal to 1 carbon credit. And that carbon credit could be worth a few bucks. It could be worth a few $100. It depends on the process. It depends on the type of carbon credit process used to extract the carbon. And it can get a little bit complicated. So carbon credit generation works like this. You start a carbon capture project. Many of those out there. We're going to kind of focus on bamboo and forestry. So there's some trees and some bamboo planted, and with some rigorous assessment using scientists and third-party verification, you can measure how much carbon you're removing. It can be a complicated scientific process. It can also be very expensive to make these calculations. And they get verified through companies like Vera or Gold Standard. In Europe, there's something called the EBC for biochar, that is European Biochar Certificate. There's a few different groups out there that are doing these verifications. And then the verified, once the carbon credit is verified, that carbon credit can be sold on an international market like any other commodity. Or you could hold on to it and hope that it appreciates like any other investment. And then as those carbon credits are verified and certified, they are registered and tracked to guarantee authenticity and to prevent fraud. We want to make sure if somebody says that they collected a certain amount of CO2, that really happened. And if they sell that credit to someone else, we want to be able to track that and make sure that people aren't selling their credits repeatedly and fraudulently. So that's another area where this carbon credit market gets a little bit complicated. So they're using blockchain technology and things like that to guarantee the authenticity and secure those carbon credits. So the carbon credit market right now, like I said, it's kind of blowing up because of the various international treaties and mandates, as well as efforts by companies just to improve their image, to do something positive for the environment, whether it's strictly a PR thing or whether they are philosophically committed to improving the planet. In either case, there is a growing demand for these carbon credits and growing interest in these projects that generate positive carbon, that is removing carbon from the atmosphere. Some people call it carbon negative. Some people call it carbon positive. It gets a little bit confusing if you're talking about whether you're removing it or storing it or sequestering it or something else. But so there's a lot of pressure, and the pressure creates demand, and demand causes prices to go up, and prices going up causes speculation. And right now there's a lot of demand for carbon credits, and prices are going up. And it is estimated by some people who make these estimations that the carbon credit market, carbon sequestration market, will grow from its current valuation, or this is 2021, of about $2 billion a year up to $7 billion a year by 2028. And a lot of these treaties are based on 2030, the year 2030 carbon neutrality goals. And so as that date approaches, as that deadline approaches, demand is going up and the market could become somewhat frantic. Could also turn into a bubble. It could like overinflate, and the speculators could lose out in the end. It's really unpredictable, as these things so often are. So how does this work with bamboo? Bamboo acts as a carbon sink. It's very effective at that because bamboo grows so fast. It captures far more CO2 than trees because of its fast growth rate and high metabolism. It stores that CO2 in the roots. And that is very interesting because unlike trees, if you cut down a tree, the tree's got CO2 stored in its roots and in its biomass as well. But when you cut down the tree dies and the CO2 is released from the roots back into the air. With bamboo, if you cut down the bamboo, the majority of that CO2 is in the roots, and it remains in the roots because the roots continue to live, because bamboo is a grass and its energy is stored mainly in the root system. So you cut down a pole and the root system is still alive, and that root system will continue to produce more and more poles. And so that it makes it a very effective carbon sink, a place where CO2 is stored for long periods of time. And even as you harvest it, the sequestration of CO2 continues. And so that's a pretty great thing. So you can not only sequester the CO2, but you can be harvesting the bamboo and making products and earning an income on those bamboo products as at the same time as you are sequestering CO2 in the roots of the bamboo. And so it's kind of a win-win. You're helping the environment, you're creating an economic opportunity, a business opportunity, and you're also making money on the carbon credits if you can do that. It is very expensive, like I said, to get certified and verified for a CO2 sequestering project that involves storing CO2 in the roots in the soil. It's a bit difficult to measure how much CO2 was in the soil before, how much you are adding to the soil when you grow bamboo. And there's lots of testing that needs to be done. It ends up costing thousands and thousands of dollars, easily $50,000 to $100,000 or something like that to get an assessment. Those prices can vary pretty widely, but it is pretty costly. And as a rule of thumb, I'd say it's about 10,000 acres minimum of bamboo forestry or bamboo plantation to justify the expense of getting the verification done. So if you just have a few acres of bamboo, or you're thinking about planting, 5 acres on your backyard, it's not going to be worth it to try to get carbon credits on a project that small. It's got to be pretty large scale operation. But in the case of a large scale operation, it is a win-win situation because bamboo captures, and these numbers are hotly debated, and you can find a huge range on the internet. But most people say somewhere 15, 25 tons per acre. Depends on so many different factors, but that's roughly where I would put the number. Every project needs to get assessed individually, but that's a safe range. I've heard numbers as small as 2 or 3 tons per acre, as high as 400 tons per acre. But this is kind of a safe zone, I believe. And carbon credits for this type of project for agroforestry, where you're talking about storing CO2 in the roots of the plants, those carbon credits can sell for $30 to $40 roughly. Again, there's huge range on this, and prices fluctuate, and it's a volatile market, but that's kind of a rough idea. So based on these assumptions and these very rough estimates, you could say you're looking at maybe $600 to $800 per acre in carbon credits. And that's in addition to whatever else you're doing with your bamboo. If you're selling bamboo shoots to the market, if you're making bamboo boards, if you're making bamboo wind chimes, bamboo charcoal, various things. And that's also what you make with the bamboo is going to affect your carbon credit measurements. One thing to be aware of is that if you're not harvesting your bamboo, the bamboo will age and gradually decay in the land, in the soil. And as those poles age and decay, they will be releasing CO2 back in the environment, back into the atmosphere. And so it's no longer acting as such a powerful carbon sequestration tool at that point. So to maximize the carbon sequestration, you really need to be harvesting that bamboo responsibly, steadily, ongoing as the bamboo is growing and maturing and producing new poles. You harvest the poles at their peak when they're a few years old, and the new shoots will come up, and you're promoting more and more growth, which means more photosynthesis, which means more CO2 being sucked out of the atmosphere and stored in the plants and the poles and the roots and throughout the biomass. Now, if you're taking that harvest and turning it into a product that doesn't last very long, like bamboo tissue paper, which is a hot item, bamboo toilet paper, we did a video on that last week. You can check it out. If you're doing that, then that bamboo will break down quickly. And when that breaks down, it releases the CO2 back. So it doesn't have such a long life expectancy. So there's a life cycle analysis that's done in conjunction with the carbon credit verification process. And it can get a little bit complicated. Like I said, if you're making something like charcoal from your bamboo, the charcoal is intended to be burned. When it's burned, you're releasing greenhouse gases back in the atmosphere. So there's some great advantages to bamboo charcoal, but as far as carbon sequestration, it's not the number one way to do it. Other products like building material, if you're making that bamboo into building material that's going to go into a house or a building of some kind as a substitute for tree lumber, then there's CO2 in that wood, in that material that's going to be locked in there for a few decades. And that's something that's difficult to measure, difficult to quantify, but it is possible to measure that and calculate that into the life cycle analysis when you get carbon credits on your bamboo farm. So that's something to think about. And then there's biochar. I am super excited about biochar, as are many people in the bamboo world and throughout the world, at least in my limited social circles. We do like talking about biochar. It's not that pretty. There's some gray stuff there. It's like charcoal basically, but it is cooked biomass. In this case, we're talking about bamboo. They cook it down into charcoal, more or less the same thing as charcoal, but it's used not to burn and cook with it or to use for heating, but it's used to add back into the soil as a fertilizer. It's super beneficial when you mix that biochar with your compost and then add that to the soil. Super good for attracting beneficial organisms and helping with the moisture retention. Lots of great benefits. And other uses of biochar include adding it to feedstock, livestock feed, feeding cows and pigs and other animals. It actually helps their digestion quite a bit when you just add trace amounts of the biochar. It can be used in water filtration. Biochar and charcoal are great filters for drawing out impurities. There's a lot of science about biochar. You can read all about it on the internet. We've got a video about that as well. And there's a lot to know about biochar, but it's an amazing product. Mostly the biggest benefit in my mind is as a soil additive. It helps to restore the soil and replace or reduce the need for commercial chemical fertilizers, which can be expensive and can often be, involve a lot of chemicals and things you might not want to add to your soil if you're an organic farmer, for example. So the biochar is great for that. And when you bury that underground, you're burying CO2 in your soil. And that means you're sequestering carbon, and that means you can get carbon credits for that. And when you get carbon credits that way, it is actually a lot easier to quantify than it is when you're measuring how much CO2 is being stored in the roots of your bamboo. And this makes sense on much smaller scale. If you have, there's still kind of a cutoff. If you have about 1,000 tons a year of bamboo biomass, then it becomes pretty worthwhile to get, if you're turning that biomass into biochar, it definitely makes sense to get carbon credits on that. And then you can use the biochar, you can sell the biochar, and at the same time, you can get the carbon credits for it. So it's kind of a double whammy, a win-win for your pocketbook and for your quality of your soil, and also for the atmosphere, because you're taking that CO2 out of the atmosphere, bringing it into the plant, cooking it down, and then burying it underground, and then it's buried there for long term. So on the life cycle analysis, that scores big points. So many ways to take advantage of bamboo for carbon sequestration, and also take advantage of that sequestration to get some carbon credits if you've got enough bamboo going on. It could be a very interesting addition to whatever bamboo business you already have happening. I hope that was super informative and educational and helpful. If you have questions, let us know in the comments. You can find me at bamboobatu.com. Links are in the notes. And don't forget to share with your friends. Click the like button, subscribe if you want to, and make Bamboo Batu your new favorite. All right. Have a great day. Thanks.